When he saw himself coughing up blood, he subconsciously reached into his pocket. Inside the paper wrap was the black pill Zhang Explode had been carrying. Just as he was about to swallow it, he inexplicably halted. He stared at the pill he had refined for a long time, then sighed disappointingly. Then he threw away all the pills, one by one rolling down a deep ditch of several feet. And in that ditch corpses were everywhere. At the top was the young man. Zhang Explode fell ill from the day the teenager left. Besides coughing, he often had nightmares. In those nightmares he could see many children standing outside the door staring straight at him, sending chills down his spine. Not surprisingly, he was startled awake. Covered in cold sweat, he sat up and looked at the bloodstains on his chest, feeling even more despair. In fear and panic he hurried to the pharmacy. He grabbed a black pill and stuffed it into his mouth. Unexpectedly, as soon as the pill entered his mouth, he coughed it all out. That's right, these pills are totally useless. Frustrated Zhang Explode directly overturned the table. If not for the heavy medicine stove, he might have been kicked down by him. Helpless, he curled up in the corner, crying uncontrollably, his voice full of sadness. The prescription for the black pills was torn off by him, vaguely recording the method of eradicating pulmonary tuberculosis, which was to use a 9-year-old child's temple hair as a medicine and then decoct it for consumption. But now, it seems that this so-called prescription is utterly useless. One rainy night, Zhang Explode saw a young man running away in town. Perhaps due to the slippery ground from the rain, the young man slipped and fell. This also caught the attention of the two black-clothed men who followed closely behind. Only to see one of them. His finger suddenly burst into a flash of lightning. He then pressed it directly on the young man's temple. Accompanied by a hysterical scream, an extremely terrifying ghost face suddenly appeared. This scene happened to be witnessed by Zhang Explode, who happened to pass by. Originally, the sound of the rain was so loud that it didn't attract much attention, but Zhang Explode's coughing did. The sinister-looking creature spotted the target directly, and in an instant Zhang Explode saw it pouncing towards him. He hadn't even reacted yet when he lost consciousness. When he woke up again, he found himself in the ruins of a temple. It is somewhat ironic that the dilapidated temple he found himself in was the same one where he had originally rescued the young man. In front of him was a warm fire and a person dressed in black. When the person in black saw him wake up, he gestured towards him. He was probably asking if he saw anything strange. Zhang Explode immediately understood. In an instant, he thought of that guy with disheveled hair resembling a demon. Instantly, beads of cold sweat as big as soybeans hung on his forehead. Seeing this scene, the man in black immediately understood. He signaled to his companion at the door, then handed a stack of pills to Zhang Explode. Zhang Explode was surprised at first, but when he saw that his chest was also covered with such pills, he suddenly realized what was going on. He realized that he had encountered a master. Zhang Explode was extremely grateful. He clasped his hands together, bowed deeply, and then kowtowed. He already regarded the two men in black as his saviors. Soon after, on the following day, he was taken to a Taoist temple. Looking at the many disciples in the temple, his heart was filled with hope. And considering his identity as a doctor, he was fortunate to have been assigned to the scripture library to help out. It was from that time on that he began to encounter Chu Wu and Shang. He also became aware that beyond this world, there exists a completely different world. Even with the support of the pills from the Qingyun sect, he still could not rid himself of the deeply rooted tuberculosis. Finally, one night he collapsed in weakness. Though he was gasping for breath at the moment, he did not pass out. In a daze, he was unsure if he had started dreaming again because the child, who had only appeared in his nightmares before, was now all lined up at the door. This time is different. It seems like they are already prepared to come in. Zhang Explode was so frightened that he pulled the blanket over himself and buried deeply in it, hoping not to be seen. But unfortunately, the severe pain in his arm made it unbearable for him. He screamed in agony and sat up, only to find himself surrounded by the detestable children who seemed to be about to feast on him. But at this moment, Zhang Explode suddenly realized something was wrong because a child was standing at the door motionless, seemingly not intending to participate at all. But when he carefully examined the child's appearance, he found that the word death was written large on the child's face. Just one glance at Zhang Explode made him feel breathless. He could feel that the figure standing opposite was not a child at all, but an extremely terrifying deathly ghost. However, at that moment he felt so weak and helpless, unable to muster any resistance. On that night Zhang Explode died, but he also came back to life. He emerged from his own blood, transformed into a Shang who could clearly understand himself. He wanted to become a divine doctor, but his soul was shattered because of a ridiculous prescription. Although he died, he was still alive, as he turned into a Shang after death. Thanks to having had contact with Shang and Chu Wu at the Qingyun Temple during his lifetime, he was able to. He is well aware of his current state. Therefore, under the strong urge to survive, he ran wildly through the alleys until he saw an innocent night watchman. So he lived again. He took over the body of the night watchman. He turned into a living person who could only survive miserably in the darkness. Although he still didn't know the name of the watchman, he remembered that his name was still Zhang Explode. Although it's not summer now, the sunlight outside is still quite deadly to him. He just reached out slightly with his hand, the piercing pain was unbearable for him. Desperate, he could only shrink his body trying to get through this long day. But at this moment, a clay pot suddenly smashed to pieces not far away. It sounds like there is a dispute happening. Zhang Explode, who was suddenly awakened, quickly looked up and realized that many people had already gathered around. Out of curiosity, he also followed the sound and looked over. It was this look that suddenly brightened his dim eyes. The one surrounded was a teenager. The deep blue pupils and fine black lines are unique features of Shangman. Shangman, the young man, does not attack humans. He is just constantly avoiding. And people detest such an anomaly. They raised their sticks and mercilessly struck down one after another. Although the pain was not much as a walker of the Nether Gate, he couldn't hold back and vomited a mouthful of blood. And from that pool of blood, many bloody footprints emerged. Zhang Explode knew that the origin of these footprints was of the same kind as himself. But he now had no time to pay attention to these because he had discovered a shocking phenomenon. Those Shang creatures that ran out from the bloodstains couldn't take more than a few steps before being obliterated by the sunlight directly. However, that Shangman boy was not at all afraid of the glaring sun. He didn't look like he was injured at all. Zhang Explode was extremely shocked by this, and he stared wide-eyed, looking carefully. Finally, he discovered that the boy Shangman was not immune to sunlight, but rather had an abundance of Shang filth in his body to resist the sun's disinfection. With this, he had the capital to walk under the sun. To investigate further, Zhang Explode put on a mask and tracked the young Shangman back to his home. Leveraging the knowledge of Chu Wu learned at Qingyun Temple, he used a golden needle to completely seal the young man in front of his mother. He then buried him in the wilderness in a bright red coffin. But on the night of the burial, Zhang Explode secretly returned and quietly dug open the grave to take away the young man. So the young man became his experiment. He removed the golden needle used for sealing and tightly bound the young man to the long table. He needed to ensure that the young man remained conscious, for only in this way could he obtain reliable and sufficient experimental results. Zhang Explode cut open the young man's skin and found that Shangman's blood was no different from that of ordinary people. It was red. He also learned from the tears in the young man's eyes that even after becoming Shangman, he still had the sense of pain. But he did not expect that in just a moment, the wound he had just cut open had already healed. So he concluded that Shangman's wounds can heal on their own. And then he tied the young man under the sun, confirming the speculation that Shang filth could resist the sterilizing effects of sunlight. But even so, he still had a big question in his mind. Where did Shang filth come from? At this moment, Zhang Explode had already changed his appearance. He found the body of the night watchman too old, so he looked for a younger one. Suddenly, a thought occurred to him, leading him to a connection. Since it is recorded that the golden needle can be used to seal Shangman, could Shang filth also be related to gold? He thought to himself and hurried back to his room. He took out a gold ingot from a tightly wrapped box. He pasted the gold ingot on his forehead and carefully sensed it. Sure enough, the Shang filth did exist within this gold. At this moment, he suddenly seemed to have lost his mind. He began to laugh hysterically. Soon after, the situation changed drastically. The Western powers, with their strong ships and powerful cannons, forced their way into the Qing dynasty, launching an aggressive war. However, these fights and disturbances for their own interests cannot shake the resolve of Zhang Explode. In his eyes, only immortality is the right way. As the days passed, he changed his experimental subjects one after another. He also kept changing his identity, from participating in warlord struggles to going north to Yan'an. Then, he went to the countryside to implement the reform and opening up policy. Finally, in the end, he discovered a gold mine, and the location of this gold mine is now Yellow White Village. He took over the body of the then village chief, created a statue for himself, and then manufactured a mining disaster to take control of the entire mountain yellow-white. And that is the experience of Zhang Qingzhen's lifetime. No, it should be said that it is the experience of several lifetimes for him. Because now it is time for him to pay the price for his greed. Current Chu Wu member, Xiao Yi, caught him and started forcing Zhang Qingzhen to reveal the secrets of Shang filth. Helpless, Zhang Qingzhen could only plead repeatedly, hoping Xiao Yi would spare his life. He said that he distilled it himself. It belongs to the purest Shang filth. Clearly, such a response is as meaningless as not saying anything. Xiao Yi became a bit impatient and tightened Zhang Qingzhen's neck again, making him think carefully about why the Shang filth would be among the gold. The sudden suffocation made Zhang Qingzhen cough for a long time. Finally, he opened his mouth again, but the answer he gave this time surprised Xiao Yi. Because he said a sentence which is that gold is not originally from this world. When this was said, Xiao Yi immediately widened his eyes. This piece of news was indeed quite shocking to hear. But even so, this statement is still just empty talk. Seeing that Xiao Yi did not stop because of this, Zhang Qingzhen knew that he could not continue to deceive others. After a period of pretentiousness, he suddenly laughed wildly and mocked Xiao Yi, wanting to understand the reasons behind it. "You'll know when you're dead." Upon hearing this, Xiao Yi was suddenly shocked. Could it be that this guy has another trick up his sleeve? But he didn't have time to react at all. He just heard a sharp sound breaking through the air from behind. Shocked, Xiao Yi quickly turned around, only to see a golden gleam narrowly missing his throat and flying out. Ding Qing took a closer look and realized that the golden arm that had just flew by was actually the other golden arm of the guy. And on the palm of that hand, there was an undamaged blue Shang pearl. The dodged golden arm hit directly on the huge Dan furnace in the center of the corpse water, emitting a deafening roaring sound. Xiao Yi ignored this because he was injured, with a near-fatal cut to his throat. And Zhang Qingzhen took advantage of the chaos and ran away. So he is very angry now. If he catches that guy again, he will definitely kill him on the spot without any hesitation. However, before he could take any action, a crisp cracking sound suddenly came from the Dan furnace. Then he saw some shiny golden liquid oozing out from the cracks. Seeing that it was just a crack in the Dan furnace, Xiao Yi didn't pay much attention to it. But the next moment, he noticed an extremely violent energy rapidly expanding. Immediately after, the giant Dan furnace exploded with a bang. In an instant, the scalding hot liquid gold directly poured into the pitch-black corpse water below, and then exploded for a second time in an instant, causing golden waves several meters high. Startled, Xiao Yi quickly jumped back, trying to avoid the splashing range of the golden corpse water. Although he was already far enough away, his heart kept pounding and his hair stood on end. So he didn't think twice, suddenly rushed back, and then grabbed the body of the tall guy and fiercely pulled it back. However, even though he had tried his best to hide behind the body, he still couldn't avoid some golden corpse water splashing onto his arm. What was even more shocking was that after the mixed explosion of golden liquid and corpse water ended, it left behind a very eerie thing at the scene. The cooled golden liquid formed twisted and intertwined golden vines along the explosion trajectory. On top of these vines, there seemed to be many golden flowers blooming. Though this scene was stunning, it left Xiao Yi somewhat shaken. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his arm. Xiao Yi quickly lowered his head to check. He was shocked to discover that the golden corpse water spilled on his arm had unknowingly eaten through his clothes and even corroded his arm, leaving gruesome wounds. Even Xiao Yi found it unbearable to endure this deep-seated piercing pain down to the marrow. But now he didn't have time to deal with these because he had already scanned around and found no trace of Zhang Qingzhen. In other words, Zhang Qingzhen had escaped from the Dan room long ago. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt chills down his spine. With Zhang Qingzhen's current state, he will most likely go and find the next substitute. And the closest one to him should be Zhang Explode. In fact, Xiao Yi did guess right about Zhang Qingzhen. At this moment, he is crazily navigating through the darkness like he did years ago. He passed by the eighth who was fighting zombies, ignored the seemingly fragile old Taoist, and went straight towards the most perfect body. Zhang Explode. This time he must not fail. I wonder how many people still remember our big sister, Gong Ling. She dragged her weary body to Yellow White Village to investigate the disappearance of Shangman, and has since gone missing. Xiao Yi and others who arrived later also searched in vain, only finding a helmet stained with blood. During the investigation, they found that both Gong Ling's disappearance and Shangman's secrecy were related to the sudden appearance of the tall guy. After that, they traced all the way to the mine of Mountain Yellow White and encountered a flood of minor corpses. And this tall guy was not living either because inside him resided a Qing dynasty quack doctor, Zhang. He constantly seizes the bodies of others in pursuit of immortality, living to this day. The number of innocent people who have died at his hands is uncountable. Not to mention that just recently, he ominously told everyone that Gongling had died. So the two sides, which were already at odds, engaged in a large battle inside the mine. Xiao Yi even vowed, "I will make him die here." The eighth quickly led his two disciples away upon seeing this, not wanting Xiao Yi to be distracted or his two disciples to be affected. So they passed through layers of zombie horde and arrived at a relatively safe corridor. Here they not only found a cart full of gold, they also found traces left by Gongling. Then, guided by the faint sound of flowing water, they started searching for an exit inside the mine. Considering that Zhang Explode has been carrying Shang girl for a long time, the eighth, who has been acting as their master, feels sorry and asks if his physical strength can still keep up. Unexpectedly, Zhang Explode, despite gasping for breath, grits his teeth and insists that he's fine. Seeing old Taoist Ma, he also gives the same response. The eighth's expression was complex and couldn't help but praise. "Very good, worthy of being my disciple." However, as a well-known amnesiac, this time he called out the wrong name again. Zhang Explode became Ma Explode in his mouth, and Ma Dejun old Taoist even happily accepted his new name called Baogua. Both of them have gotten used to it and couldn't be bothered to correct it anymore. But suddenly the eighth asked a shocking question. "Do you want to become Chu Wu?" Old Taoist Ma did not hesitate at all and immediately expressed his attitude. If he did not agree to such a long-awaited thing, he would definitely be out of his mind. While Zhang Explode was clearly shocked by this question, he couldn't help but think of Xiao Yi and Gongling. He also remembered everyone at Lisong Temple. He also recalled his mission as Chu Wu. Therefore he, who was originally Shangman, was somewhat unsure whether he could truly be accepted by Chu Wu. But the eighth seemed to say a few words without even thinking. It must be possible. He also said that this trip to Mountain Yellow White should be considered as an initiation ceremony for the two of them. Once you have passed this ordeal, you will be able to stand on your own. So as long as everyone follows him back to Lisong Temple, he will officially teach you the way to eliminate Shang. Upon hearing this, old Taoist Ma jumped up excitedly like a child, and Zhang Explode was even more excited, looking as if he was full of energy all over his body. But the master's next words were a bit of a mood killer. "So when we get back, you will hand over the gold to me for safekeeping." The two of them heard this request that didn't even require acting. Old Taoist Ma could only reluctantly agree to this. But our Zhang Explode didn't care at all, imagining his majestic appearance when controlling thunder and lightning in the future. He agreed firmly. But it was just this moment of distraction that made Shang girl's body unstable, nearly slipping from his back. Zhang Explode quickly apologized and readjusted his posture. Feeling very cheerful, he wanted to chat. So he tentatively asked for Shang girl's name. The conversation between the two of them relies completely on the spiritual resonance between Shangman. However, Shang girl seems to not respond to him. Zhang Explode did not mind and continued to tell his own story. He said that he had previously encountered a child. His situation was similar to yours. At that time I wanted to save him, but he killed many people. But you are different. You can still talk to me, which means you have not changed, you are still human. I believe they can save you, just like they saved me in the past. Believe me, my name is Zhang Explode. We are the same kind of people, and we can save you. Shang girl quietly listens, still as motionless as before. Before long, they seemed to hear a clearer sound of water, but the water flow was very small, only a miniature version of a waterfall. The daylight was shining down from the hole above their heads, and all around them were steep stone walls, damp and with no place to climb. Even more terrifying was the bottomless abyss just ahead, dark and chilling. Strangely, right at the edge of the cliff, there was a clear footprint, the eighth. At a glance, he recognized that this was Gongling's footprint. He quickly looked around and his intuition told him that Gongling must have climbed up from here. This is undoubtedly good news. But how should we get up there? Zhang Explode couldn't help but ask. Unexpectedly, the eighth confidently declared that everyone could climb up. He then pointed to a few intertwined vines nearby, glanced at Zhang Explode behind him, and the eighth knew what the great disciple was worried about. So he decided to secure Shang girl to himself and climb up first. Zhang Explode immediately blurted out subconsciously, saying that it was not possible. Not to mention the previous master almost tripped over Twisted Waist, and almost threw Shang girl far away. Just the steep cliff in front of his eyes made him afraid that his master would climb with difficulty. Old Taoist Ma nodded in agreement after listening. The mountain wall is slippery. Cliff has no bottom. Any misstep will lead to certain death. Or let's wait for Uncle Master Xiao Yi to arrive before deciding. The eighth shook his head repeatedly because he had many concerns. The most straightforward one was, what if old Xiao didn't take this route? Wouldn't we have waited in vain? Upon hearing this, Zhang Explode had a sudden inspiration. He asked his master to go out and find a rope first while they waited here. Old Taoist Ma immediately shouted out in authentic Hunan dialect, Zhong, which means, okay. The eighth became furious, saying, how can okay help at all? What if you encounter danger while I'm gone? As soon as these words were spoken, both disciples fell silent. Just at that moment, Zhang Explode's eyes suddenly glowed blue, as if he had heard something. The next moment he shook his head repeatedly and said, this is absolutely not acceptable. The eighth immediately felt puzzled and asked, who are you talking to? Zhang Explode suddenly realized and remembered the conversation with Shangman, which outsiders couldn't hear. So he quietly pointed to the Shang girl on his back. It turns out that the Shang girl had just told him to pull out the golden needle on her head, so she could climb on her own. The eighth immediately widened his eyes when he heard that. No way. What if after pulling it out, she has ascended to Shang? What should we do? Zhang quickly explained, saying that the Shang girl is still conscious. She is still human and will not ascend to Shang. But before he could finish speaking, his eyes turned blue again. The eighth, feeling somewhat impatient with Zhang Explode's silent state, asked him what Shang girl had said again. Zhang Explode frowned and hesitated. He said the girl doesn't want to burden us, doesn't want to cause us to die here because of herself. Upon hearing this, the eighth and old Taoist Ma both fell silent. The originally firm opposition seemed to waver a bit. Zhang Explode also hesitated, because he thought of the appearance of the previous Shangman boy again. But for some reason, a sense of inexplicable courage made him close his eyes. He put Shang girl flat on the ground without hesitation. With a determined look in his eyes, he reached directly for the golden needle and said that no matter the consequences, he would take full responsibility himself. The eighth, who wasn't prepared at all, was greatly surprised, but it was already too late to stop it. Just saw that the golden needle was being pulled out inch by Zhang Explode. And Shang girl's fingers also trembled slightly a few times. Looking at the still unconscious Shang girl, Zhang Explode quietly said to her, I believe in you. But at this moment the entire mine tunnel suddenly shook violently. Through the layers of mountain walls, they heard a muffled and oppressive explosion sound. When the tremor subsided, everyone looked back in shock. They knew that the commotion just now was definitely related to Xiao Yi. And in the pitch-black mine tunnel, something bad is coming their way. The next moment, a surge of dark blue energy rushed towards them, causing several people to stagger as if being swept by the aftermath of an explosion. Old Taoist Ma was hit head-on by a surge of Shang filth, and the murky energy flowed directly into his stomach. The nauseating feeling made him feel so uncomfortable that he squatted down. The eighth saw the situation and looked back in the direction he came from with a solemn expression on his face, always feeling that something bad was about to happen. Sure enough, at the next moment, a dense and continuous sound of bones colliding suddenly sounded. The eighth sensed something was wrong and hurriedly shielded the two people behind him. Sure enough, with the Shang filth just now, the miner's corpse that was already dead came back to life again. His face looked a bit unsightly as he silently prayed in his heart, hoping that old Xiao on the other side wouldn't run into any trouble. He didn't know exactly what kind of commotion old Xiao was causing on the other side. But for the safety of his two disciples, he still took the lead and rushed into the group of corpses. He played with do-it-yourself stuff in his hand with great skill, just a single sweep of his energy, and the clusters of dried corpses fell to the ground. This scene made Zhang Explode and old Ma cheer and rejoice, with an admiration that was overflowing. The eighth also greatly enjoyed watching, and he even struck a cool pose to go along with it. But the next moment, an extremely dangerous feeling made his hair stand on end. He subconsciously dodged to the side and saw a gleaming blue long knife cutting down towards his ear. The sudden crisis scared Zhang Explode and the other person into standing up. They cannot let their master be distracted by difficulties. So Zhang Explode and old Ma both exerted themselves to fight against the dried corpses that had slipped through. Although their techniques were crude and their effectiveness minimal, they still fought with high spirits. They wanted to prove to their master that they had the ability to stand on their own, and at the same time they didn't want the Shang girl by their side to be disturbed. On the eighth side, after a fierce battle, He finally discovered something was wrong. Damn, no wonder the force was so great. Turns out to be them. Seeing the towering mummified figure in the cave unable to straighten up, the eighth cursed loudly, asking angrily who was the one controlling it. The only response to him was the 4 long knives fiercely swinging towards him. Suddenly old Taoist Ma screamed for help, which startled Zhang Explode into a shiver. He looked closely and only then did he realize that a short knife was hanging above old Taoist's head. He was almost unable to hold on. Zhang Explode saw the situation and picked up a stone before rushing over. This blow hit the dried corpse right on the temple, resolving the danger faced by old Taoist. But before they could catch their breath for a moment, a sharp breaking wind suddenly struck, only to see a shovel splitting down towards Zhang Explode's head. He had no time to evade at all. In a moment of urgency, Zhang Explode instinctively raised his arm, only to find that the originally fatal shovel suddenly floated past him. Not only did it swing off course, even the attacking dried corpse was thrown by a tremendous force onto a distant mountainside. Shocked, Zhang Explode, with his nerves still rattled, quickly turned around to look. He then realized that Shang girl had already appeared beside him at some point. Her deep blue eyes made her look exceptionally elegant. Shang girl stared at Zhang Explode for a while, then quietly said, "I can move now." This time she truly spoke out loud. Zhang Explode and old Ma were overjoyed and excited beyond words. Zhang Explode is excited like a child, repeatedly thanking Shang girl for saving his life. He also said that this shows that Shang girl is still human and will not ascend to become a Shang. He rambled incoherently with nonsensical boasting. It made Shang girl feel a little embarrassed. She couldn't help but lift the black cloth in front of her. At that moment, the eighth suddenly shouted at them to be careful, with an urgent look in his eyes as if he wanted to rush over immediately. Zhang Explode didn't even have time to react before seeing a huge black figure rushing towards them. This was followed by a piercing sound of breaking through the air, as a long knife swept across and aimed directly at Shang girl's head. Then came a crisp sound of swoosh, as the long knife, like cutting through tofu, directly sank into the handle of the shovel. If the handle was not sturdy enough, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even so, Shang girl was still swept away by this tremendous force. She was directly lifted up and flew horizontally away from the two of them. Zhang Explode was horrified at the sight because right behind Shang girl was a bottomless abyss. So he rushed over without thinking, but no matter how hard he tried, it was already too late. At this moment, Shang girl had already been knocked into the sky above the abyss, and Zhang Explode, anxiously leaning at the edge of the cliff, could feel that in that instant, he had touched Shang girl's fingertips, but he just couldn't reach her, just that little bit more. The two locked eyes but grew distant, until they disappeared from sight. A deep sense of despair and sadness instantly filled Zhang Explode's heart, as if some hope and beauty were suddenly shattered violently. He was stunned, kneeling motionless at the edge of a cliff for a long time, oblivious even when several corpses approached him. The next moment, Zhang Qingjin arrived. He rushed over like he had found a treasure, laughing wildly. He grabbed Zhang Explode's head and said, "Your body is mine now." However, he just prepared to use the art of possession, but found that his Shang power couldn't invade at all. Feeling helpless, he simply gave up controlling the zombie and instead condensed the unmatched Shang filth, preparing to take down Zhang Explode in one move. But he didn't expect that at this moment Zhang Explode suddenly stood up and even grabbed his neck. Zhang Qingjin was shocked and turned pale. But even so, it did not stop the invasion of Shang filth. And Zhang Explode never once looked at him from start to finish. 2 lines of clear tears slid down his face. These tears seemed extremely domineering, falling on the broken stones and emitting a magnetic black. Suddenly Zhang Explode fiercely lifted his head, his deep blue pupils filled with hatred. The black patterns on his face were rapidly spreading, marking the characteristic of Shang ascension. "You damn thing!" Zhang Explode was full of anger and directly bit down fiercely. Zhang Qingjin let out a heart-wrenching scream, feeling like a part of their body was being forcibly ripped out. At that moment, he no longer had any thoughts of dominating Zhang Explode's body, only hoping that the other party would spare his life. However, Zhang Explode, like a madman, continued to bite and tear without caring about the taste, swallowing it down forcefully, knowing that he had brought this upon himself. Zhang Qingjin was in despair. Whether he begged for mercy with tears and sobs or pretended to be pitiful with tears streaming down his face, Zhang Explode turned a deaf ear. He only vented his unmatched anger. This time Zhang Qingjin once again saw groups of children, which he saw as death demons. He did not want to die, but he had no choice. Neither Zhang Explode nor the innocent people he had harmed in the past could allow him to live. Then the statue at the foot of Mountain Yellow White shattered and dissipated along with his body, never to exist in the world again. At that moment, although Zhang Explode had avenged his deep grudge, the inexpressible sorrow still lingered in his heart. He knelt down in despair, looking at the abyss below with a heart as lifeless as ashes. The scene just now has already frightened old Taoist Ma quite a bit. Even so, he still anxiously shouted, "Explode!" And the eighth was very straightforward. He charged directly, even throwing old Taoist Ma, who was in the way, out. The situation with Zhang Explode is not right. He must quickly wake him up. He used the method of striking the temple that he had taught Zhang Explode in the past. Zhang Explode did not resist, letting his master strike his head directly. However, the do-it-yourself shattered the eighth unexpectedly. Zhang Explode never imagined that his beloved treasure, which he had followed for many years, would be so fragile. Could it be that this kid has already... At this point, Zhang Explode's heart instantly sank to the bottom of the valley, because he thought of something so terrifying that it was hard to accept. Sure enough, before he could prepare himself, the original impact force exploded suddenly. The surging air waves devastated everything in their path, sweeping all the fallen corpses to the end of the corridor. Old Taoist Ma was already weak. This impact made him fall unconscious without any hesitation. On the eighth side, even though he had already placed the do-it-yourself stick handle on the rocky ground, he was still knocked back to the wall by the impact force and looked at the do-it-yourself fragments beneath him, feeling puzzled. He couldn't understand why Zhang Explode's body possessed such a powerful force of Shang filth. But at this moment, a murmured sound of crying and laughter suddenly came from Zhang Explode's mouth. "I can't save anyone, I can't save anyone. Their departure, all because of me." Zhang Explode recalled his own past experiences. Anyone close to him will encounter misfortune. So he really is the jinx. Suddenly he let go of his burdens, smiling with tears on his face. He said, "I'm sorry. I'm the one who should die the most." And then he lost control, or rather, his tightly wounded heart suddenly let go. So those long-trapped emotions surged out like a bursting dam, spewing out from Zhang Explode's blood-stained mouth. This scene startled the eighth. It was a sign of Shang ascension, and Zhang Explode must not be allowed to fall into despair. This time he finally called out the right name. Perhaps he never forgot the name of his beloved disciple. But now it's all too late. Zhang Explode seems to have closed his heart to the outside world, ignoring everything. Those who escaped, on the other hand, quickly possessed the desiccated bodies of the miners and, as if possessed, converged towards Zhang Explode. But strangely, these dried corpses did not attack Zhang Explode, but instead climbed and twisted together. They extended their hands to support Zhang Explode's feet, and Zhang Explode dragged his feet step by step towards the edge of the abyss. He did not fall because under his feet was a corpse bridge formed by countless dried corpses. And this situation is also a rare phenomenon after Shangman's complete Shang Ascension corpse ride. The eighth felt a sudden chill in his heart. He couldn't accept that the result of all their efforts to save Zhang Explode would end up like this. Zhang Explode was already beyond saving. But just then, a hurried sound of footsteps suddenly rang out. It was the killing intent rushing up the mountainside. This momentum even startled Zhang Explode, who no longer cared about anything. Even before he could react, he saw a black figure flashing by. Then his own head seemed to have flown up. At that moment, a faint hint of light suddenly flashed in his dark blue pupils. Because he saw the person who had arrived, that person was the long-lost big sister, Gong Ling. She didn't die, that's great. Zhang Explode died. After he completely ascended to the top, Gong Ling slashed his neck with a knife. In fact, he had long lost the faith to live on. Since witnessing Shang Girl fall into the abyss, he had realized that everyone close to him would meet misfortune. In that case, he might as well end it while he still had some sanity left. But what he didn't expect was that he had just stepped onto the corpse bridge and arrived above the abyss. He was suddenly slashed by the big sister who appeared out of nowhere. At that moment, a faint shimmer suddenly flashed in Zhang Explode's eyes. Because he saw his long-lost eldest sister safely returning, he suddenly felt relieved. At the same time, a fully armed team appeared in the forest outside Mountain Yellow White. The drizzling rain made a young girl complain endlessly. She worried that the messy grass would dirty her shoes and that the rain would wet her short skirt. But the handsome man in a suit next to her was much more easygoing. He stood stylishly in the rain, answering the phone without a care, not even holding an umbrella. However, listening to the content of his conversation, It seemed that he came to this place in the rain only because he was commissioned by someone. Meanwhile, not far away, Gong Ling, who took Zhang Explode's head at Mountain Yellow White, has also arrived behind the 8th. She has never met Ma Daijin, so she is very curious about the identity of this old Taoist. The 8th spoke in a low, deep voice and quietly said, "He is my newly accepted disciple." Upon hearing the disciple's name, Gong Ling suddenly fell silent because the head wrapped in linen cloth in her hands was also a disciple newly accepted by the 8th. While she was in silence, a sharp breaking wind suddenly sounded from a distance. When Gong Ling turned around, she saw Xiaoyi rushing towards her and performing a super cool slide step in front of her. Because she saw her big sister from a distance, Xiaoyi felt happy. Even after she got up, she kept staring at Gong Ling and kept muttering, "It's good as long as you're okay." But when he looked around, he realized that someone seemed to be missing from here. He hurriedly asked, "Where is Zhang Explode?" Upon hearing this, the 8th and Gong Ling did not respond. Perplexed, he looked around and then, casually, he noticed something in Gong Ling's hand. Then a deadly silence spread instantly. He kept his eyes fixed for a long time. He couldn't believe that Zhang Explode had turned into this in just a short while. He couldn't understand why this young man, with such a strong will to survive, could not escape the fate of Shangman. He couldn't let go of the fact that he had promised to help Zhang Explode recover, but now it had become a lifelong regret. The 8th comforted Xiaoyi, who suddenly clenched his fists in a deep voice. It is said that at that time Zhang Explode had completely reached Shang Ascension, and no one could stop him. He silently picked up the DIY fragments scattered on the ground. Suddenly, the 8th could no longer contain his emotions and gritted his teeth to curse Zhang Qingzhen. He said that it was because of this darn thing that Zhang Explode had just come over to take over the body, leading to Zhang Explode's complete ascension, during which Zhang Qingzhen was also torn to shreds by the ascended Zhang Explode, causing his soul to scatter. Xiaoyi never once looked away throughout. He heard about what was discussed in the 8th, but precisely because he understood the whole story, the sense of guilt in his heart became even stronger. Seeing this scene, Gong Ling quietly patted his shoulder, indicating everyone to go back and discuss it later. It was not until this moment that Xiaoyi, who had been silent for a long time, finally uttered a dull Just as he turned around, Gong Ling directly noticed the shocking wound on his arm. Gong Ling immediately became nervous and asked him with concern about the severity of his injury. This reminder made Xiaoyi remember the injury he had sustained earlier. He smiled and covered the wound, saying it was nothing serious, just a superficial injury. Of course, he knew that this explanation couldn't fool Gong Ling's eyes, so he quickly changed the subject and began asking Gong Ling about his disappearance. Upon hearing this guy actually worrying about getting hurt, Gong Ling felt both angry and amused because in her opinion, the person who could hurt her might not have been born yet. At that time, when she received the reminder call, she was indeed ready to return to the palace. But she didn't expect that as soon as she turned her head, a cold light flashed towards her. At the critical moment, she could only raise her helmet to defend herself. And this is also the reason why Xiaoyi found the damaged helmet in the woods. And after blocking this fierce blow, Gong Ling not only took the opportunity to seize the weapon, but also kicked the masked monster's head in return. The kick was so strong that the masked monster was almost knocked down directly. In order to identify the newcomer Gong Ling's identity, she did not rush to act. But what she didn't expect was that the masked weirdo acted like a lunatic. Not only did he not say anything, but he also kept his head down and relentlessly attacked. In that case, she doesn't need to be polite to him. Gong Ling sidestepped several attacks in a row. And at the same time as the monster swung his fist again, she counterattacked with the short knife she had taken back. Looking at the cold light coming closer, Zhang Qingzhen under the mask broke out in a cold sweat. If it weren't for the strong mask, I'm afraid his head would have split in two by now. Although he barely avoided this blow. But the mask had already cracked, and even his head was starting to tingle from the impact. Angrily, Zhang Qingzhen once again disregarded all consequences and swung his fist fiercely, as if to avenge his previous disgrace. And this move also made Gong Ling's eyes go cold. Since he was determined to seek death, she had nothing to say. Only to see the short knife swirling thousands of flowers in her hand, rolling up Zhang Qingzhen's arm. In just an instant, Zhang Qingzhen felt his body being cut into countless segments. Even his head was chopped off. He was shocked. He hurriedly grabbed his neck, afraid that his head would fall off. Strangely, the expected sensation of weightlessness did not occur, as if he was experiencing an illusion. Terrified, he quickly looked at his own hands. He then realized that everything was intact. and the woman was still standing in place, as if she had not moved at all. At this moment Zhang Qingjin was truly scared. Even though he was not injured, he dared not lay a finger on her again. His intuition told him that this woman was very dangerous. If he dared to approach her again, what just happened in the illusion would become reality. So without a second thought, he turned and fled. This was also the first time he had been in such a sorry state since becoming Shangman. At this point, Gong Ling's face was filled with disdain. The eighth echoed, saying, "How could that guy's skills possibly harm our big sister?" But saying so actually aroused Gong Ling's curiosity. Then why are you two in such a sorry state? With this question the atmosphere instantly turned frosty. Seeing this scene, Gong Ling did not ask further but inquired about the findings of the two instead. Upon hearing this, Xiao Yi took out a gold nugget and said that the issue was much more serious than they had imagined. It would be best to discuss it in detail after returning. Indeed, this was not the place to talk. So, Gong Ling, even if curious, could only nod in agreement. Just then, several dazzling flashes of lightning suddenly shot out from the cliff. Greatly startled, the few people all became vigilant. And in the next moment, the sound of the military's unique rapid descent ropes came over. Then they saw several dark figures descending from the sky, even aiming their guns as they landed. Xiao Yi was initially startled, but was dumbfounded upon recognizing the newcomers. He didn't understand how these guys suddenly appeared here. It turned out that the newcomers were all his old friends, belonging to the D4 department. The handsome man in the suit named Li Huan is the team leader. He explained with a smile that it was the third brother who called. He was worried that you might be in danger, so he came to check on you. As soon as he finished speaking, De Guo on the side couldn't help it. He spoke in a discordant Cantonese accent and blurted out everyone's concerns and nervousness all at once. He even pointed at the young woman next to him and said, "Shasha heard this news and didn't even have time to put on makeup before rushing out." As soon as he said this, the young woman immediately scolded him angrily, telling him to shut up. Even more peculiarly, this Miss Shasha took a large stride forward directly. She walked straight towards Xiao Yi, even deliberately bumped into Gong Ling's arm on the way, as if she was clearly demonstrating. Listening to this girl shouting Xiao Yi brother in a high-pitched voice, Gong Ling couldn't help but feel goosebumps all over his body. And Xiao Yi, knowing he couldn't escape, could only stand still, trying hard to maintain a smile on his face. The girl named Yin Sha came to Xiao Ye's side and started to show concern. She even screamed in horror upon seeing the wound on his arm. When De Guo heard this, he grabbed the medicine box and rushed over, insisting on treating Xiao Yi first. But as he had barely taken a few steps, he suddenly widened his eyes and couldn't help but retch. Everyone was used to this kind of situation, and no one went up to care. After pausing for a while, De Guo frowned and said, "There is a strong presence of Shang filth here, and whenever his body senses it, he can't help but retch. So he wants to know what exactly happened here." When these words were spoken, the originally lively atmosphere suddenly became eerily quiet. And Shasha quietly moved her hand towards her thigh because her secret weapon was hidden there. In fact, her actions had long been noticed by Gong Ling. So she was already prepared to counterattack the moment Shasha rushed up. Shasha's weapon is quite extraordinary. One could only see a surging blue electric current bursting out from the pink handle. The electric current instantly solidified into a more than 1 meter long electric blade. Then what happened? The terrifying pink lightsaber clashed fiercely with the short knife in Gong Ling's hand, creating an unmatched momentum for a moment. Interestingly, when the two of them fought like this, the group of men on the side didn't even try to stop them, seeming completely unconcerned. Gong Ling couldn't bear it anymore and angrily asked her if she was sick. Unexpectedly, Shasha smiled, pressed the lightsaber and retorted, "You're the one who's sick." At this moment, although Shasha's momentum seemed more dominant, but the small tiptoe effort has already betrayed her. And then she retreated back with force, holding onto her glasses to carefully scrutinize Gong Ling. She said that these glasses are her Shang filth recognition device. It shows that there is a strong presence of Shang filth on Gong Ling's body. At this point, Gong Ling couldn't help but tighten his grip on Zhang Explode in his hand. But she never expected that this girl would suddenly change gears and start laughing nervously. She laughed and said, "Gong Ling, you have a deadpan face." She even asked if she was Shangman because she had never seen Gong Ling smile since she was a child. Upon hearing this, Li Huan quickly stepped in to mediate, while Gong Ling couldn't be bothered and told her to take her medicine if she was sick. Li Huan's peacemaking skills were really not great. He smiled and said, "We are all family," while quietly telling Shasha to put away the knife. But Shasha was not appreciative at all, angrily snorted and said, "Who is family with her?" Unable to do anything about it, he could only apologize to Gong Ling and the others one by one. But Gong Ling's unwelcoming expression, along with a gesture of holding the knife forward, made Li Huan turn to the other people disheartenedly. In his mouth we also learned for the first time about the eighth's name, Bofu. Li Huan, as the team captain, greeted with an all-inclusive attitude, so he even greeted the unconscious old Taoist Ma. But come to think of it, when they were on the ground, they detected a strong presence of Shang filth here. Could it be that a Shang man has appeared? Li Huan asked with a smile, his eyes also glancing intentionally or unintentionally at Gong Ling's hand. Seeing that something was amiss, the eighth stood up. He admitted that indeed a Shang man had appeared in this place. Upon hearing this, Gong Ling couldn't help but look toward Xiaoyi, who was already prepared to take action again. And Shasha, who always doesn't shy away from trouble, once again raised her light blade. But the cards played by the eighth are difficult for most people to catch. I thought he would tell the truth, but who knew that he suddenly came to the edge of the cliff and pointed down, saying that Shangman fell down there. How do you say this? I'm afraid even a lie detector wouldn't be able to handle it, because there really is a Shangman below the cliff, who is the Shang girl that Zhang Explode is determined to rescue. Li Huan also disregards the truth and directly gestures towards the next person in line. Those two people are eagerly getting ready to go down and take a look. One of them made a reassuring gesture to everyone before going down. It must be said that cool is really cool, and miserable is truly miserable. He had just flipped down when that seemingly sturdy pillar snapped with a click. The noise startled Li Huan, but once he understood what had happened, he then laughed it off and even started chatting with Xiaoyi about who would be paying for the meal later. Considering that Xiaoyi was injured, he advised everyone to go back early for some rest and recovery. As for the mountain yellow-white side, just leave it to them. Speaking of this Xiaoyi, I can't help but think of the Dan refining place in the center of the mine and the golden flowers blooming on the black corpse water. However, he thought about it and realized there was no problem handing it over to these people, so he agreed to it. At the moment of parting, Shasha shouted out to her brother Xiaoyi once again in her characteristic tone, and of course, she bumped into Gong Ling fiercely once more. After Xiaoyi and the others walked away, Li Huan, who had been smiling all along, suddenly became serious. This change in demeanor was a complete contrast to his previous behavior. I just don't know if his expression is aimed at the follow-up work of Mountain Yellow White or at the people who just left. I'm afraid it might be both. On the eighth side, they have already brought old Taoist Ma to the edge of the cliff. From here, they can use the equipment of Li Huan's team to return to the surface. But at that moment, Xiaoyi patted Gong Ling's shoulder. Then he quietly reached out his hand. Gong Ling immediately understood and carefully handed it over to Zhang Explode. At the moment he took it from Zhang Explode, he silently prayed with one hand on his forehead for Zhang Explode. When they returned to the ground, the rain had stopped. The sunlight pierced through the clouds and shone on the mountains and forests, bursting with vitality. Not far away was a shattered statue at the foot of the mountain, broken completely. Even Zhang Qingzhen's name was full of cracks. Under the statue was a person who had long since died, crushed. It was the village chief of Yellow White Village. I wonder how things ended up this way. Can we comfort the souls of those deceased miners in heaven? A mountain cracked, and many miners' bodies were exposed. This scene also startled the passing villagers. But in a place invisible to them, the souls of those miners have finally found liberation. Right now they are standing in the mountains and forests, letting the sunlight completely dissolve themselves. The sunlight also shines on the mountain of Lisong Temple, dispersing the days of gloom. The third brother, who had been standing under the mountain gate for a long time, finally let go of his worries because the crow brought good news. At this moment, Xiao Yi and the others are already on their way back to the mountain. The driver is still our big sister. But unlike before, everyone's mood is a bit heavy. Xiao Yi has been silently looking out the window without saying a word. And Zhang Explode ended up in the eighth's hands. He felt that only by holding it himself could he feel at ease. Perhaps he wants to use his inner feelings to sense the aura of Zhang Explode again. Unexpectedly, as soon as he closed his eyes, he noticed something was amiss. Shocked, he quickly signaled to stop the car. Upon hearing this, Gong Ling decisively pressed the brake pedal without any hesitation. No matter what happened and no matter what the eighth was going to do, she did not hesitate for a moment. It was not until the car came to a stop that the two of them hurriedly inquired about what had happened. The eighth did not respond, just staring in shock at the Zhang Explode in his hand. He slowly unraveled the linen, and a hint of dark blue Shang filth also slowly dispersed. Xiao Ye's eyes widened in shock. His expression gradually changed from curiosity to surprise. He couldn't help but exclaim, "You truly are a person full of miracles." At the same time, two people appeared by a river somewhere unknown. A person dressed in funeral clothes was making strange movements with their head and body. Look at all those densely sewn stitches on his body. You can tell that this guy is no longer alive. On the side, there is another strange person in a long robe crouching down. There is a golden needle inserted in the person's head, obviously some kind of restraining technique. And this person is none other than the strange man with a scarred face who slaughtered the whole gang of Black Boss previously. At this moment, he is sighing as he stares at the river. As expected, the person in funeral clothes is none other than the Black Boss turned into a cunning zombie by him. But what's unexpected is that the person who evoked profound pity from the flower-face man is actually the Shang girl who fell into the abyss. Could it be that there is a dark river beneath the abyss, and she drifted all the way here along that river? Just don't know what happened to the Shang girl after she was taken away by this guy. Does she still remember Zhang Explode, who wanted to save her with all his efforts?